Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the Wealthy Dentist Podcast. I'm your host, Ward Powell. And if you're a dentist looking to crack the code on how to grow your practice and dominate in this space, then stick around. You're in the right place. Every week, we're sitting down with some amazing dentists who are doing incredible things in their businesses. We're talking about everything from how they keep their teams loyal and dedicated to how they stay ahead of the game in this crazy, fast-changing industry. You'll hear about hacks like using virtual assistants to free up your time, strategies to make more sales with less effort, and even mind-blowing stories about patents and inventions that are changing the industry as we know it. And it's not just about growing your practice, it's also about finding out what works from a clinical perspective. Whether you're just starting or you're ready to scale to the next level, there's something here for you. So buckle up, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive in. We have with us this afternoon attorney Justin Morgan, who has his own practice. Just opened the Morgan Advisory Group in June of 2024. And he's here specializing in the healthcare space and providing legal and business counsel to his clients. Help me in welcoming attorney Justin Morgan. How you doing this afternoon?
I'm well, thank you, Ward. How are you?
Good. Thank you for joining us and taking the time. So tell me, I know there's a book coming out, but I want to ask what got you started with the interest in working with the health care community.
Thanks for the question. I may add a little bit too much information, just classic overshare, right? But I'll tell you about my kind of professional history and how I got to this point. I went to Santa Barbara for undergrad, SC for law school. I litigated doing dispute resolution for about 5 years after law school. So that was construction defect, which goes through the construction process, defect resolution, and then general commercial and bankruptcy litigation, which resolves disputes between civil litigants and disputes within the bankruptcy context. I decided to move into the healthcare space. My dad's a doctor, brother's a doctor, grandfather was a doctor. And so I've been kind of in this space of working with private practice doctors since I was 18. And there was an opportunity to go to Bank of America and kind of learn this dental business, which is very unique. And that's how I got introduced to the dental community. And so I was financing acquisitions, real estate deals, helping people start practices. And I did that for about 1.5 years. And then I came out back into the practice of law as a corporate attorney. And so my office, we've got a couple of different professionals that we contract with, both on the real estate side and then people that we network with on the brokering side to help people achieve what they need to achieve, whether that's a practice acquisition, sale, or consulting or expansion. And so I've been working in this space for about 6 years now. I work with a lot of dentists throughout the country. I work with vets and other doctors as well. And, we do a lot of acquisitions, a lot of sales, a lot of startups.
Awesome. That's great. Well, thank you for that. I see already you guys obviously are doing a whole lot of stuff right, because you're already talking about expanding, and that's a key indicator of how things are looking for you guys in the future. So tell me about the new attorney from the real estate department that you're going to add into your firm.
Yeah, his name is Mauricio Aguilar. I've known him for a long time. He's worked at real estate departments like Tesla, Rivian, Apple, opening stores, opening locations throughout the country. And so, most dental leases are like 1,000 square feet to 2,400 square feet. acquisitions can get bigger, 4 million, sort of $4 million acquisitions, depending on your location. Mauricio's got, you know, um, the capability to handle more complex transactions, and has done deals throughout the country. And so, we both can kind of tag team these deals and make sure that the clients are well represented. And one, we combine his real estate knowledge on the complex side, and also the dental knowledge, which is like industry specific, right? There's like nuances that are beyond the actual lease that need to be explained to the dentist, to the practitioner, to just make sure that there's no uncertainty and surprises down the road.
Mhm. So give me an example. What the surprises? What kind of surprises pop up when people are moving into a new space, a new community?
Yeah. Understanding triple net or CAM or operating expenses, it kind of depends on the jargon, but it's all the same. So in a lot of leases, in almost all leases, the tenant is going to pay for maintenance costs. The tenant's going to pay for taxes and insurance too. And that's either bundled in one flat rate or it's separate from the actual rent. That depends on the landlord. What we don't want for the client is that client to be surprised by the CAM bill or the triple net bill, because you'll get it over the year and then you may have like a catch-up payment that you have to make. And then every year that may grow. And so we try to negotiate to make sure that we cabin those costs, we control those costs, and we prevent the landowner, the landlord, from just passing on arbitrary costs to the client. So that's one thing that is really important. And I've got a client right now who is, sending me tax bills saying like, why am I getting charged for this? And the answer is that, this was always what you had signed up for. It's just we're looking at it a little bit more, we're scrutinizing it more here, but this grew by 3%, which is relatively standard. Or there's a special assessment and it may go away the next year. So we like to avoid those sorts of, pop-up concerns, because it takes a lot of time from the dentist, right? Like every time you take your eye off the ball, which is one, providing clinical care, and two, managing the business, you're losing money or you're losing your time. It's the same thing. So we want to avoid those circumstances. And also you have to pay your attorneys, you have to pay other professionals to re-walk you through things that may have been better explained on the front end.
Mhm. So if you can, explain to the listening audience the CAM bill, if you will. I know it's an acronym. Can you break that up for us?
Well, it'll look like a budget, right? It'll look like a profit and loss sheet for the real estate. So you have all of the expenses that need to be paid to maintain a property: utilities, trash, water, janitorial, cleaning up graffiti, depending on where you are, basic repairs and maintenance, patching roof leaks. All of those things should be itemized out. There should be management fees or admin fees. We need to make sure that those are fair. Those should be itemized out so that the dentist can understand what they're paying for. And the best landlords will do a good job because at bottom, they're providing a product to their clients, which are the tenants. If they do a bad job, the tenants move away. With dentists, the office location is difficult to build out, so it's a sticky relationship. So we have to make sure that they're done right on the front end. Otherwise, you're dealing with that for 20 years, or you're dealing with, kind of a less than optimal lease for 20 years, because you don't just move a dental office every 5 years.
That's
It's too
right.
difficult.
That's right.
Yeah.
So how does the what are some of the, I guess, the top three ideas or things that a dentist should think about or do on their behalf I mean, just to do the due diligence, if you will, on landlords? I mean, how do you determine whether one is good over the other?
I don't know if you'll ever know that, right? You
Yeah.
can tell by the way they maintain the property, but it's really hiring the appropriate people to help during the process.
Mm-hmm.
So that's getting a good attorney, getting a good broker.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of folks think like, oh, the landlord's super nice to me, I don't need a broker. Um, the landlord may be being nice because they're either a nice person or they know that they don't have to pay a broker fee,
Mm-hmm.
or they're taking advantage of the tenant and getting a fantastic deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so, depending on where you are in the country, the brokers are typically paid for by the landlords to bring new opportunities. So it kind of behooves you to get a broker, and yes, you end up financing that maybe by adding a little bit of money to the rent every month,
Mm-hmm.
but it's good financing, and it's best to have good people on your side to make sure that you're protected during the process. And so leases are implicated in all transactions, whether that's a transition, so you buy and sell a practice, expansion, you open a new practice, or you start up your first practice. So you always have the real estate component.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So tell me then, this book that you have with this interesting, very interesting title for
Yeah.
dentists and something they should know. Could you
Yeah.
tell us about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I just finished my first, well, I finished the manuscript. It won't be self-publishing on a book. It's called Shit Dentists Need to Know, right? I don't swear on the cover. You kind of asterisk stuff out and just leave that. But you know, I realized as I grew and learned more in this industry and read my own books that there hadn't been something that I had seen that did a good job of consolidating general information, right? I add some of my experience and stories to kind of drive points home, but just try to explain things from a high level. There's a lot of information that bounces around and it's piecemeal. It's on podcasts. It's on one-off, um, like blog posts, and like that's a lot of hustling to go figure all of that out. And plus, I didn't want to do all of it, so I just figured I'd write a book.
Mm, awesome. Is this your first piece or?
Yeah, this will be my first book.
Okay, okay, all right. Well, wow. I'm definitely looking forward to reading it. Uh, so tell me, what has been over the years, some of the most challenging episodes that you've had in your career that you can share with us?
Yeah. Um, the toughest deals are when folks have different expectations, right? Um, and when people lack trust, right? And so when someone has a very high fear of mistrust or like really doesn't trust the other party, they negotiate very hard over minor points, and that sometimes breaks up deals or it takes months, and that drives costs,
Very good
right?
point.
And
Yes.
so we're talking about, here's a pretty complete sentence that explains what we need to do, but the other person wants to add on another three clauses,
Mhm.
and that's okay, right? Especially when there are major economic terms that matter. Um, but sometimes we can get into the weeds on transactions, and that slows things down and prevents deals from closing. And then the other is, if a seller has um, a view of the practice that it has X value and I deserve this, that's fantastic, and maybe they deserve it, but a buyer needs to believe that as well to be able to consummate a transaction.
Mhm.
And likewise, a buyer needs to be willing to pay what is reasonable. And so having those expectations align is really important. It's easy when you've got a million buyers, right? Or five buyers on a transaction. Much more difficult when smaller town, urban or suburban area, and there's one potential buyer, right, in that area that's ready to go. And so, those are a little bit more difficult because they're far apart and they may have very different ideas of how a transaction should be conducted. And so those can be challenging to make sure that these people come to the center. And that is part of what attorneys do, right? Which is we'll say one thing outwardly, and then we'll speak to our client and say, hey, look, this is what I think is reasonable under the circumstances. And we'll kind of push back on the client and really make sure that we're on the same page so that they are seeing the same facts that we are seeing with their lens.
Mhm.
And that goes to having a persuasive attorney that can understand what the client needs and what those concerns are, listens to those, and then make sure that what the other information that's coming in is going to be okay. So those can be challenging transactions.
Mm-hmm. So when you're actually working with a client and you want to give them obviously the best service as you possibly can, um, I can see what trust could be an issue.
Yeah.
It could be a problem in so many ways. And how do you gain a client's trust when they first come into your office? What are the kind of conversations that you have with them?
Um, I don't know if my clients trust me. I think it's important to have a real conversation, right? And figure out who you are. And you know, it's important to try and understand and get a good understanding of who that person is and whether you guys are a fit, right? Because certain personality types don't match.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll tell my clients, like, hey, if you want me to argue over like petty stuff, I probably am not your guy, or you're going to pay me a ton of money, because I'm just not going to do it, right? I'm not going to attack it with the fervor that someone may want. If you want to act like this is $1 billion technology deal, right? My goal when I talk to my clients and I try to let them know this is my philosophy, right? And this is what I'm going to deliver to you. I'm going to make sure the information is clear. We're going to go through it. I'm going to make sure that we're respectful and we preserve the goodwill in a transaction, because those relationships really matter. Your relationship with your landlord matters a lot, right?
Mhm.
So if you beat up your landlord because they really need someone to lease the space, they're going to hate you for like 20 years. And so when it's like, oh, I got a roof leak and it's leaking on my desk, they're like, oh yeah, I'll see you over the weekend. We'll get to it. We'll get to it in the spring. How's that?
Mhm.
Right? And what are you going to do? You're going to sue because your desk is wet? Like, no, you're not going to do that. You're stuck. And so it's good to maintain the peace. And the same thing happens on a transaction with the seller. The seller, if the seller acts brash and beats the piss out of the buyers can be pissed. And if the seller needs something, like, hey, where's my ARs? Like, I don't know, I lost it today, right? And the ARs are sitting under the desk, and you make them wait another week. So you kind of avoid those petty interactions, because it helps everybody in the long run. And that's how I see my job, in addition to doing the legal piece. Because the legal piece is, what does this say? Does it say what we want it to say? Does it protect the client? If it doesn't, they need to know why and whether or not this is a big deal. And then the human piece is, we're walking down this path together. Don't step in mud.
Well, I think you have an interesting approach, because if you're in the idea that a client is uncomfortable with you in some type of way, where they're not really trusting you, but you understand that as a professional, and you still, I mean, instead of firing them, and maybe, I don't, who knows? I mean, you might very well fire have fired some of your clients. I know I have. So, but when you come into those types of situations, you still have to be a professional, and it sounds like you have a good mindset on that.
Yeah, I don't often run into trust issues with my clients,
Hmm.
right? The
Hmm.
trust, when I talk about trust, is usually between the two parties. So
Okay.
that's between the buyer and the seller.
Yes.
And so if one person thinks the other person is evil and they're stuck in a transaction, that's the difficulty. That's the trust and the loss of trust that I'm talking about.
Mhm. Mhm. So what's your idea? Who's your ideal client? What does that look like?
You know, I think the ideal client doesn't look, um, from like a financial or a career point. It's just someone that's got, um, that's really open to growing, right? That is a business person at bottom, or is that at least interested in it? I mean, I help. help all different types of people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, I kind of have a growth mindset. I'm very business focused. And so I look at the bottom line and I'm like, this matters, it doesn't. And that is my mindset. So I typically attract those types of people, right? There are others that may be more focused on like protecting and a little bit more of a scarcity mindset. And they typically attract those other types of people, right? And so it just kind of depends. I haven't really met too many people I don't like. Um, every once in a while, I'll know whether or not it's a fit, like just by having the initial conversation. And those engagements usually don't happen, so it's okay.
Mm. Mm. So when you I mean, just give me an idea of, what, what your, I guess we basically said a little bit about your ideal client. What's your ideal situation? Well, I mean, you do a lot of work in a lot of different places. I know you mentioned that, but your sweet spot, what you really, really like, what really resonates with you when you're doing your work, the work that you do. What part of the business is that?
It's the human piece, right? And it's just working with an entrepreneur or a business person that is stepping out or engaging in a really important like transaction. And so that's the sweet spot. It's not, oh, I only want to do $2 million acquisitions or $10 million DSO roll-ups or $100 million like recaps, right? It's it's hey, we're just working with good people and helping him through that process.
Mhm.
And that is what feeds me, right? I have good human interactions at
Mhm.
all points of the day. And one thing that we try to do with the firm is we don't want to be transaction, right? This isn't like, hey, I gave you a couple grand. Here's a document. Good luck, pal. Right. And hey, call me when you're ready to give me more money. Like, that's not how I want to live my life. And
Mhm.
that's not how I structure my relationships,
Uh,
nor is it how I deal with my clients. So
mhm.
that typically lends itself to a pretty cool, like laid back, but intense, right? I work a lot and we work really hard to do our jobs and take care of our people. But it leads to a pretty relaxed relationship where people can text me and it's like, hey, can we jump on a call? Because I've got this burning issue. And it's like, for sure. Right. And I have the dispute resolution chops, and I'm confident enough with litigation matters where I can talk through these things and assess risk and exposure with relative confidence. We can never do that with absolute certainty.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Wow. Wow. So any like buyers that you see down the road in the from the legal standpoint for dentists?
I see economic issues,
Okay.
which is increasing rents
Mm-hmm.
and compressed profit margins due to decreased reimbursements, inflation, the cost of professional assistants and hygienists,
Mm-hmm.
and the scarcity of those individuals, right? And so I mean, and I live in Los Angeles. And so even 7 years ago, 6 years ago, when I got introduced to the industry, we saw this compression where you have average practice generates 38% of income to the owner. Let's call that seller's discretionary earnings. You make $100, the owner gets 38. And in LA at the time, it was more like 33 or 32, right? So you'd see a lot of these practice with compressed margins. And so that was a little bit more scary. Now, dentists in the market have adapted to some degree by charging in addition, right? They provide additional services. It's a nicer experience, it's a nicer place. The individuals in the big cities, they want to pay a little bit more for that experience, and we balance it out. It's still challenging, right? Because there's only so much you can charge for a teeth cleaning. You've also got other competitors coming in that are just hygienists without dentists that are providing cleanings in mass and no dental work. And so we always have a few big things every year in the marketplace. And that's just part of the circle, right? There's always going to be something a little bit disruptive every year, and that's okay. It's just those are the things that I see down the line, not necessarily from a legal standpoint. And then you have, aggregations and DSOs and people that are scooping up other practices, and the landscape is changing. And that's also okay, right? Because there's a natural equilibrium to it. You may not love the DSOs. You may want to say, hey, we want everybody to be solo practitioner. And we want to go back to 20 years ago, but that's also not feasible with the financial pressures. And it's not feasible with the speed at which and the precision at which you need to run your business, right? Because of the financial pressure, you need to be better at running the business. And that may behoove you to bring on a financial or a strategic partner to acquire the practice and run that for you and take some of that away, because you may not be able to afford or buy a manager to do all of the stuff that a DSO does and keep the same profit margins, right? There's like a full-time manager that would handle all the DSO work, maybe $120,000 to $150,000 if they're excellent, if they do the exact same thing a DSO does. And so it may make sense to sell upstream and take this off your plate. So those are some of the shifting sands that I see for dentists, and I think that applies throughout the country, right?
So were you about to say something else?
No.
Okay. So where do you find yourself the most, in the DSO space or the private dental group space, when you're doing your work?
It's interesting. I have a couple different types of clients. A lot of my clients are independent physicians, doctors that are acquiring other practices or doing their first practice or doing their sales. And so I've got a good smattering. I would say 20% is sales, 40% is acquisition first time, 40% is, 30% is like large groups acquiring more in all of the corporate deals that we need to do there. So that's partnerships, buy-ins, buyouts. So it's actually relatively even over a couple different categories of work. And then I also work with optometrists and vets. And so each of those markets have different strategies for growth.
Yeah. So, okay. Where is it that you find yourself the most busiest during the year? Any particular time? Any particular?
My vacation. My vacation. Right? It's like the moment I put the out of office on, it's like, hey, I need you. I need you tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's not as cyclical as you would think.
Okay.
And so it really depends. I mean, the way I structure my practice, and I lose a lot of opportunity this way, is like I just stop answering the phone during December and taking on new clients, right? Because I don't want a client to come in and say, hey, I want to close in 2 weeks. And I'm like, that's going to be tough. And so I do take a little bit of time to reload and get reorganized. But there's activity, throughout the year that's pretty consistent. And I work in a couple of different verticals. So, it's kind of always moving.
Wow. Good for you. That's great. I mean, and so December is your month to just say, okay, I got to rewire.
No, I'm just closing. I'm closing everything, so I can't bring on new stuff.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, but it's still it's pretty consistent in terms of the pace. So
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's definitely good to know. So, is there any information that you like to share with us that we hadn't covered so far? What are your thoughts about? You've already talked about the future of dentistry. What are your thoughts right now on anything that we haven't talked about at this point?
If a seller has a view of the practice that it has X value and I deserve this, that's fantastic, and maybe they deserve it, but a buyer needs to believe that as well to be able to consummate a transaction. And likewise, a buyer needs to be willing to pay what is reasonable. And so having those expectations align is really important. It's easy when you've got a million buyers, right? Or 5 buyers on a transaction. Much more difficult when smaller town, urban or suburban area, and there's one potential buyer, right, in that area that's ready to go. And so, those are a little bit more difficult because they're far apart and they may have very different ideas of how a transaction should be conducted. And so those can be challenging to make sure that these people come to the center. So I think something that's important to address with your podcast, which is the Wealthy Dentist, right?
Yes.
Is that, ownership is important for growing wealth. Partnership can be a great way to do it as well. And I would encourage people when they are ready to make that leap and find those opportunities because they exist. In big cities, it's hard to get started because rent in New York, 15 grand a month, really difficult to get that start. You may want to start outside of the city, Long Island, New Jersey, whatever, build that practice if you really want to be in downtown Manhattan. But there's also ways to get it done. And so people are getting creative. And this is ultimately a statement of positivity, which is you can get this done with the right approach. A really great positive story was I had 2 female clients. They wanted to start up. They wanted to start up in their hometown. And so there was, amazing synergies with their hometown, just being there, knowing the people, the culture, all of these things. Rent was 15 grand a month. Neither of them could get the space because it was too expensive. They couldn't get a startup loan. So they worked together, combined forces, got the space with 2 startup loans, and were able to consolidate those later. And it's a successful clinic. And the great thing about that is that that's a high barrier to entry. So now you have a moat around that business because it was so difficult to get it started. It's hard for somebody else to start up right down the street. So they're going to have built-in revenue, patient base, all of those things, because they went through that difficult period of figuring out that piece, and that got them to where they wanted to go. And with regarding the concept of DSOs swallowing the world, I think there's an equilibrium point because there's only so many people that are going to work for a DSO for so long. And so I don't think that we'll ever see private practice dentistry go away in total. I think we will see, concierge clinics that are very expensive that cater to the top most wealthy groups of society. We'll see more flexible models for insurance-based repayment and maybe even leaner designs and models for government-based healthcare plans. And so there's going to be the winner will get the spoils, right, of figuring out how to run these organizations effectively and cost efficiently. And so I think there's always going to be opportunity, and that's the way that I approach it, especially when we have technological advances in AI and the automation of certain things, right? So once we automate billing, once we automate note-taking and charting, all of that stuff, will provide headwinds for dentists in terms of saving money. And so we may have leaner staffs and more calm dentists that are able to click a couple buttons and things are taken care of. And so I do have some optimism with that.
So how, because the thought did cross my mind about AI. How does that help your business? Or let's just say, how has that affected your business in any way, if it has in any way, positive or otherwise, AI in what way?
It'll affect the lawyer business by reducing the time that's required to get an answer. Now, as we get more legal answers uploaded and have those set up, if we have to ask a question, how do I set up a professional corporation in Rhode Island? I'll have answers immediately. That's different from takes me 2 hours to research what's required. I have to go check Secretary of State. I have to work with third-party provider to do the forms, right? That will provide efficiency for the clients, right? The speed at which we can form an entity is 5 minutes in California. So those things will be helpful. I don't think AI will be able to manage the personal relationships, because you won't be able to feed in the verbal cues and the negotiating tactics and all of the other needs of the client into an AI, because that would just be a human, right? So, and they would need to be present for everything. And so I don't think that it'll ever take the place of a human, but it will drastically reduce the paperwork and the turn time to provide documents, answers, feedback. Now I say this, if we could get AI into planning departments for permits and approvals, we would have an amazing boom throughout society. It's like, oh, this is a good idea, boom, it's approved. Like that would be amazing.
Well, I'm sure the government employees wouldn't like that much. But,
No comment.
right? Yeah, right. Sounds like it. So, oh, Justin, thank you so much for joining us. If someone wanted to contact you,
Yeah.
how would they go about doing that?
Yeah. So my email is justin@themorganadvisors.com.
Mhm.
And my website is www.themorganadvisors.com. There are links to my calendar. So you can schedule 15 minutes to just get to know me. We can talk through things. The 15 minutes free, and we'll just have a quick conversation and see whether there's a fit or a need. And then we can follow up and schedule other opportunities to get going on whatever you need from a legal or a business standpoint.
Awesome. Attorney Justin Morgan, the Morgan Advisory Group. Thank you so much for joining us, taking out time to help us from the legal standpoint. The Wealthy Dentist podcast community, I'm sure they're going to enjoy this episode. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ward.